Jacob Carter, the CEO of a growing diner chain with several locations across the country, had always believed that his company was built on family values. For over 10 years, he had worked hard to establish a reputation for serving hearty meals in a welcoming environment, but lately he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Customer complaints about poor service and unprofessional staff had been mounting, and employee turnover was at an all-time high. The regional managers reassured Jacob that everything was under control, but the reports he was seeing didn't align with the rumors he had been hearing. Frustrated and determined to get to the bottom of it, Jacob decided to go undercover at one of his restaurants to see for himself what was really going on. He chose a diner located in a quiet town a couple of hours away from his corporate office. It was far enough so no one would recognize him, and most of the employees had never met him in person. To blend in better, Jacob grew out a scruffy beard, swapped his usual business attire for a simple hoodie and jeans, and wore thick-rimmed glasses. He looked nothing like the polished CEO seen in company advertisements. He arrived at the diner during lunch hour, the place busy with patrons chatting and dishes clinking. The interior was clean but old-fashioned, with worn booths and vintage decor. It wasn't awful, but it didn't have the warm and inviting atmosphere Jacob had envisioned when he first opened the business. A young waitress approached him, her name tag reading Emily. She smiled as she greeted him, but Jacob could tell she was weary. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, and the smile seemed forced. "Welcome. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her voice upbeat but with a hint of strain. Jacob ordered a coffee and she quickly left to prepare it. As she moved around the diner, Jacob noticed the signs of her exhaustion. She was hustling between tables, balancing trays and refilling drinks without showing any frustration. It was clear that she was overloaded, but she continued to maintain a professional demeanor. When Emily brought back his coffee, Jacob ordered a burger and fries. As she scribbled on her notepad, a loud voice boomed from the kitchen. "Emily, you're falling behind. Pick up the pace," the voice shouted. Jacob glanced up to see a short, stocky man in his 40s wearing a stained apron. He figured this was the shift manager, though he had not been introduced. Emily flinched at the manager's harsh tone, and Jacob could see the tension in her shoulders. She nodded silently, then turned to leave. As she did, Jacob caught a glimpse of something that made his heart sink. She was wiping a tear from her cheek. Jacob's mind raced. How could things have gotten this bad? He had been so focused on the company's growth that he had neglected the people who made it all possible, the staff. He had heard rumors about mistreatment, but seeing it firsthand was a stark wake-up call. As Emily disappeared into the back, Jacob leaned back in his seat, considering his next move. He had to talk to her. He had to know what was really happening behind the scenes. He couldn't just sit back and pretend everything was fine. After a few moments, he stood up and walked to the counter, pretending to inspect the menu. As Emily returned with his food, he spoke up. "Hey, Emily, I've got to ask, is everything okay back there?" Jacob said, keeping his tone casual. "You seem a little off today." Emily hesitated, then sighed deeply. "It's nothing, just a tough shift. I'm fine." She forced another smile, but Jacob could tell she was masking the truth. Jacob decided to push a little further. "If you say so, but look, I'm just a customer here, but I can't help noticing you're working really hard. Do you need a hand with anything?" For a brief moment, Emily's eyes softened. She looked like she was about to say something, but then she quickly composed herself, shaking her head. "I appreciate it, really, but I'm just doing my job." Jacob wasn't convinced. He watched her walk back to the kitchen, her movements stiff and hurried. As he sipped his coffee, he could hear her voice raised in frustration through the thin walls separating the dining area from the kitchen. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Emily's voice cracked. "I'm doing the best I can. I'm not a robot." Jacob's heart sank even further. This wasn't just about one employee having a bad day. This was a systemic issue that needed addressing. He finished his meal quickly and left a generous tip, but his mind was still racing with what he had heard and seen. As Jacob walked out of the diner, he took a deep breath, his thoughts clouded with questions. How many other employees were struggling like Emily? How could he fix this? One thing was for sure, he needed to get involved. The next day, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do something. He arrived at the diner early, just as the sun was rising, determined to speak to Emily and get to the bottom of things. As he walked in, the bell above the door rang softly, and the familiar smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. Jacob looked around but didn't immediately see Emily. He noticed the manager, a tall, stern-looking woman named Karen, at the counter. "Good morning, Karen," Jacob greeted her, trying to sound friendly. Karen gave him a curt nod. "Morning. What can I get for you today?" "I'll have my usual, thanks. And, can you let Emily know I'm here? I'd like to have a word with her." Jacob tried to keep his voice casual, but Karen raised an eyebrow. "Sure," Karen said, though her tone suggested she was less than thrilled. She walked to the kitchen and returned a moment later, motioning for Emily to come out. Emily appeared a moment later, looking a little apprehensive. She walked over to Jacob's table and stood there, unsure of how to begin. "Hey, Emily," Jacob began, offering a warm smile. "I just wanted to check in with you, see if everything's all right. I've noticed some tension lately, and I'm worried about you." Emily looked at him for a moment before sighing. "It's not just me, Jacob. The whole place is a mess right now. There's so much pressure from management, and it's like no one cares about the employees. We're all just numbers to them." Jacob's heart sank again. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it directly from Emily made it feel even more real. He leaned forward, speaking quietly. "I want to help. I know things aren't perfect here, but I believe they can get better. Maybe I can talk to Karen, see if we can find a solution." Emily shook her head, a sad smile forming on her lips. "I don't think talking to Karen will do any good. She's part of the problem. But thank you, Jacob. It means a lot that you're trying." Jacob sat back in his chair, thinking about what Emily had said. He wasn't sure where to go from here, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just walk away. Something had to change, and he would make sure it did. As Emily went back to the kitchen, Jacob sat there for a moment longer, lost in thought. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the sake of the employees and for the future of the diner, he had to do what was right. Later that evening, Jacob returned to the diner. He had spent most of the afternoon thinking about what Emily had said, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the place was on the verge of collapsing. As he walked in, he noticed a few employees standing near the kitchen, looking tense. "Hey, you all right?" Jacob asked one of the workers, a young man named Tom who had been there for a while. Tom sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, man. It's getting worse every day. Karen's pushing us harder, and it's like no matter how much we do, it's never enough." Jacob frowned, leaning against the counter. "Have you tried talking to her? I mean, maybe she doesn't realize how bad it's getting." Tom shook his head. "Talking to Karen? It wouldn't make a difference. She's too caught up in the numbers. She doesn't care about us. She's just trying to keep her job." Jacob took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. "Look, I get it, but we can't just let this place fall apart. We have to do something." Tom glanced at him, a hint of hope in his eyes. "What do you have in mind?" Jacob hesitated for a moment, then spoke with resolve. "We need to get the others together. If we all stand up and demand better conditions, maybe they'll listen. Maybe we can make them see that we're not just workers, we're people too." Tom thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, man, I'm in. But we have to be careful. If we go about this the wrong way, it could backfire." Jacob smiled, feeling a sense of solidarity. "We'll make it work. We have to." The next day, Jacob and Tom began talking to the other employees. They shared their concerns and plans, and soon others began to rally behind them. It wasn't easy. There were whispers of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But little by little, the group grew. By the end of the week, they had a solid group of employees who were ready to take action. They planned to approach Karen together, and if necessary, escalate their concerns to the higher-ups. The first step would be to confront Karen with their demands for better working conditions, and Jacob would be the one to lead the charge. Jacob knew this wouldn't be easy, but for the sake of the employees, he was willing to fight. He had seen the toll the stress was taking on everyone, and he knew it wasn't just about better hours or pay. It was about respect. They deserved better, and he was determined to make sure they got it. The following Monday, Jacob gathered the employees in a back room of the diner, away from the eyes of the managers. Tension was in the air as they all knew what was at stake. The group, though nervous, was determined to stand up for what they believed was right. "All right," Jacob began, standing at the front of the room. "Today is the day we make our voices heard. We're going to confront Karen about the way things have been going around here. But we have to stick together." Emily, a young waitress who had recently joined the diner, looked uncertain. "Are we really ready for this? What if it doesn't work out?" Jacob nodded, his voice steady. "I know it's scary, but the longer we wait, the worse it will get. We have to take a stand, not just for us, but for everyone who works here." Tom spoke up from the back of the room, his voice a little shaky. "If we do this, we're risking a lot, but I guess we don't really have much to lose, do we?" The group fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. One by one, they all nodded in agreement. They had come this far, and they couldn't turn back now. Jacob smiled, his resolve strengthening. "All right, let's do this. We'll stick together, and no matter what happens, we don't back down." With their plan in place, the group made their way to the front of the diner, where Karen was overseeing the lunch rush. Jacob took a deep breath as they approached her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. There was no turning back. "Karen," Jacob said, trying to keep his voice steady, "we need to talk." Karen looked up, clearly surprised by the sudden confrontation. "What's this about, Jacob?" "I'm kind of busy right now." Jacob stepped forward with the support of the others. "It's about the way things are being run here. The conditions are unbearable, and we can't keep working like this. We need changes." Karen's eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "You're really going to pull this stunt right now?" Emily stepped forward, her voice strong. "Yes, we are. We've been patient long enough, but now it's time to make our voices heard." The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment, it felt like the entire diner was holding its breath. Jacob held his ground, eyes locked on Karen's. He wouldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Karen's lips twisted into a smirk, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't used to being challenged. "You think you can just come in here and demand changes? What makes you think I'll listen to you?" Jacob stepped even closer, the intensity of the moment weighing heavily on him. "Because we're the ones keeping this place running. Without us, it all falls apart. You may be the manager, but we're the backbone of this diner." The room went silent. The weight of Jacob's words hung in the air. The other employees stood behind him, supporting him with their presence. This was their moment to be heard, and they weren't backing down. Karen's expression shifted, but it wasn't the look of someone who was ready to compromise. Instead, her eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not going to let you walk all over me. You'll regret this." Tom, who had been silent until now, took a deep breath and stepped forward. "You don't have to like us, Karen, but you do have to respect us. We're the ones making this place work, and we're asking for some basic decency." Karen's face reddened in fury, but she was caught off guard. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She glanced at the other employees, each one standing firm and resolute. It was clear they weren't going to back down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Karen crossed her arms. "Fine," she snapped. "I'll talk to the higher-ups, but don't expect any miracles. You're asking for too much." Jacob felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. "We're not asking for miracles, Karen. We're asking for what's fair." As they walked away, Jacob couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. They had stood up for themselves, and that was something. But in the back of his mind, he knew the fight wasn't over. There was still a long road ahead. Later that evening, Karen spoke with the higher-ups. She told them what had happened and what the employees were demanding. The response was not what she had hoped for. "Make it work," they told her. "We can't afford a strike." Karen clenched her fists, feeling both defeated and enraged. She didn't want to give in, but she had no choice. The employees had won this round, for now at least. The next morning, Jacob and his team arrived at the diner, unsure of what to expect. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. As they entered, Karen was already there, standing by the counter, her arms crossed, looking like she had been waiting for them. "Good morning," Jacob said cautiously, his eyes meeting Karen's. There was a tense air between them, but he wasn't going to back down now. Karen didn't reply at first. She just stared at him, as if weighing her next move. Finally, she spoke. You want changes? Fine, but it's not going to be easy. Nothing ever is. Jacob raised an eyebrow, surprised by her response. He had expected more resistance, but there was a hint of grudging acceptance in her voice. We'll do what we can, he said, trying to keep his tone calm. But it's a start. Karen nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. We'll see how it goes, she muttered. Then, turning to the rest of the team, she added, Don't think this means everything's going to change overnight. You still have to earn my respect. The employees exchanged wary glances, but they all understood. This wasn't going to be an easy transition, but they had already taken the first step. They were ready to keep pushing forward. As the day progressed, there were small signs of change. Karen did her best to implement some of the new policies, though it was clear she wasn't thrilled about it. She was doing it because she had to, not because she wanted to. Jacob watched from the sidelines, still cautious but feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Later that evening, Karen gathered the staff together. All right, I've spoken with the higher-ups again, she said, sounding a little less defensive. They've agreed to a trial period for some of your requests, but it's only temporary. You better prove it works. Tom, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. We will, Karen. You'll see. Karen gave him a long, hard look before nodding. We'll see, but don't get too comfortable. I'll be watching you. The team exchanged small smiles. They had their foot in the door, and that was enough for now. They knew that change didn't happen overnight, but they had made an important step, and that was worth fighting for.